All right, so Shannon Sharpe has settled his civil lawsuit, and while he's been the subject of many jokes and the internet collectively kicking his back in, I just want to say as an attorney, I think that he made the best possible decision given the circumstances, and let's talk about it. So if you've watched some of my videos before, I want to welcome you back to the channel. If you've never watched some of my videos, my name is Jamahl Kersey. I am a criminal defense attorney, been practicing law for over 15 years, and on this channel, we're breaking down legal concepts so you're in the know. All right, so we have NFL Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champ. He's since turned into a sports talk media personality, a podcast host, just, numbers through the roof, really killing it in the game. And unfortunately, when he was at the height of going into being able to negotiate what would have been a 9-figure deal, a civil lawsuit comes down, and there were explosive allegations in this lawsuit. He was accused of sexual assault and rape in a civil lawsuit. It was filed in Nevada State Court. This woman, who filed anonymously, so she filed as Jane Doe, said that she was seeking $50 million for pain and suffering, psychological and emotional distress, mental anguish, embarrassment, and humiliation. So just a laundry list of all the things that would justify her requesting $50 million, right? And again, we'll talk about, again, the allegations. Is talking about rape and sexual assault, which typically would be criminal charges, right? So you wouldn't typically have it being named in a civil lawsuit. A person would call the police and say, hey, someone has violated me, someone raped me, someone sexually assaulted me, or what have you, which then opens a criminal investigation. And if the law enforcement is convinced that there is reason to believe that a crime has been committed and the accused actually committed a crime, in other words, if they have probable cause to make an arrest, then they would make an arrest, and the district attorney would review the case to determine if they're going to file charges. But we didn't have this happen. Instead, she ended up filing a lawsuit. And so these two were apparently in a relationship for a couple of years. They had met at a gym in LA. Shannon Sharpe met this woman in 2023. So he's like 56 or so now. And she was only 22 apparently. So, I mean, if he was around 54, that's over a 30-year age difference, right? And that's part of the reason why people are going in on him. Like, if you are in your mid-50s, early 50s, what business do you have dating someone in their early 20s? Now, you can date whoever you want to date. You can see whoever you want to see. And the thing is, actions have consequences, but this didn't necessarily have to go down in this way, right? You can't necessarily say, oh, because you went out and sought a young girl, you got what's coming to you. There are plenty of relationships where the man is much older and you have a female who's much younger, and they work out and they don't result in civil lawsuits and all of that. But there are some red flags that came along with this. And unfortunately, I mean, we just don't have all the details of, what would have led to these things. And part of the issue is that in terms of her main allegations, we're not really ever going to know whether she's telling the truth or not, or whether these things actually happened or didn't. Is it black and white, or is it somewhere in the middle? But as far as her allegations, we do have some insight as to what her position was and what led to her filing a lawsuit. She had said that, he wanted her to sign an NDA. That was an allegation that was included in the complaint. It's not really outside of the ordinary. I think if you're famous, if you're rich and famous, and a personality who's out there in the way that Shannon Sharpe is, then you want to have some control over, what's put out about you over social media and on the internet. I mean, we've just seen so much recently where, text messages, screenshots of text messages about intimate conversations end up getting put on the internet. Emails get put on the internet. Recordings of conversations get put on the internet. People just, going into selfie mode and talking about the details of relationships that is not for the whole world to know. And so I could understand if you're in Shay Shay's position, why you would require an NDA. I don't think that there was anything necessarily nefarious about that. But she had pushed back. She pushed back on it, didn't want to do it, and he apparently had dropped that request. One other issue that came up in the complaint is that he had threatened to kill her because she showed up late to his home. Now, again, Shannon Sharpe had come out and made a statement, a video statement saying this whole thing was a shakedown and denying pretty much everything that was alleged against him. I don't think that was a wise move. I generally am against making statements, especially going into details about allegations and what your position is. I just think that in a situation where anything, at least as it relates to a criminal case, where anything can and will be used against you in a court of law, it's just best to either not say anything at all or have your legal representative give just a blanket general statement. Our investigation is ongoing and continuing. You know, we look forward to a resolution of this matter, and just really leave it at that versus coming out and saying things that can ultimately be used against you. And that's not about being evasive or anything like that. It's just about protecting your rights. In terms of the alleged threat to kill, if you threaten to kill somebody, that can be a felony. It can be a strike. If you're in California, it is a big deal. It is a serious ordeal to threaten somebody, to threaten them bodily harm, and certainly to threaten to kill them. And so that could have been another crime that, if it actually did happen, that she could have called the police on and he could have been arrested and charged. She said he was really demanding and controlling, that he demanded complete control over her time and her body, expecting her to be at his house, on his schedule, at his command, whenever he called. That was a direct quote. You got to understand, this is a very busy man, right? And he appears to be a man with a very disciplined and regimented schedule, right? I mean, you could just tell in his physical condition, in his 50s, that he's a very disciplined individual. I've seen him post videos of workout routines, his eating habits and the like, and you don't get to where he's at without, being disciplined. And when you're on TV early in the morning, right, if you have to do hair and makeup at, 3 something in the morning so you can be on TV at 4 or 5, you have that early schedule where you can't just be sitting around, 8, 9, 10, midnight. No, you're in bed early, right? So I can see where it's one of those things where if you're like, hey, if you want to deal with me, this is my schedule, this is when we can get together, you're either with that or you're not. And probably for someone, especially a woman who is attractive and gets a lot of attention from guys, she definitely would not have been used to something like that, I would think, right? And so there's nothing really wrong with being demanding and controlling in terms of the time, right? But where it did get into, difficult waters, if you will, was her saying that he recorded their sexual encounters without her consent. And not only that, he shared those encounters with other people. You cannot do that. You can't do that. You can't record somebody without their consent, especially in doing intimate acts, right? And that's just something a person should know, right? If you're recording, and then to share that with other people, that without their consent, that is just problematic, and it can be criminal, right? So it's illegal. It can be criminal. It's a violation of somebody's privacy. It's a violation of somebody's, intimacy. It's a violation of their body to do that in that way. But I think the biggest allegations in this complaint had to do with the lack of consent to sex. And one thing, and this is something I definitely have to get out there for the fellas, is that a woman can tell you or consent to sex 99 times, right? You guys have had sex all kinds of which ways. different positions in every room, outside, in the car, at the park, whatever. And on that 100th time, if she says no or gives you any sort of indication that she does not want to do it, then you need to stop. It doesn't matter if you guys had sex 99 times before with no incident. If she communicates to you that she no longer wants to have sex with you, then you need to stop. If you guys are in the middle of an act that started consensually and she tells you to stop, then you need to stop. If you do not, number one, I mean, that's just morally wrong, right? But beyond that, it becomes criminal and you could be prosecuted of rape and you could be facing a lot of time in prison. So just understand that, all right? So she alleged that there were 2 incidents back in October of 2024 and in January of 2025 where he raped her or sexually assaulted her. And the thing is, Shannon Sharpe, he denied the allegations, right? He said that everything was consensual, and called this an egregious attempt at blackmail. And that's the thing. We are not going to know whether this happened or not. Obviously, they were in a relationship. They were involved with each other. They were going to have had sex, right, numerous times, and it was consensual sex. But she's saying that on these 2 occasions that he essentially violated her body. And so if that's the case, if he did what she alleged in that complaint, then that is obviously disgusting. There is no, there's no justification for it. I'm not going to say there's no defending that in that, obviously he was defended in this civil lawsuit. And if he were charged criminally, he would have a defense attorney represent him. So there may be a defense to that. But all I'm saying is that just from a moral standpoint, there is no defending violating someone's body, right? There's no defending raping somebody. But if he didn't do this, right? If he did not sexually assault nor rape this woman, unfortunately, this is attached to his name forever, right? And there's not going to be a way to really clear his name. And especially now, there's been a settlement reach, and the terms are going to have been confidential, right? And so neither she nor Shannon Sharpe can come out and speak on this anymore, because that's going to have been a central term to the settlement agreement, that you are not to speak about the terms of this to anyone, right? But this is why I say that this was the best thing that he could have done, is because if he had allowed this to play out, if you continue on with this civil lawsuit, number one, you're going to be dragged through litigation for at least a year, right? You're dragged through litigation for at least a year. It's very costly, time consuming. It's extremely stressful. And there would not have necessarily been a win to it, right? Because all this stuff is aired out. We've already heard recordings, information from text messages. We've already heard way too much about this case. I think if you were going to settle it anyway, it would have been ideal to get out in front of it before all this audio stuff leaked. The reality is, if she had already recorded that information, I can guarantee you that there would have been more stuff that would have ended up coming out, the likes of which that he would not want in the public eye, because it all comes back to what he has at stake, right? A lawyer is not going to offer the same advice to 2 different people, because it really depends on that person's life, their career, their reputation, what their goals are in the future. And for Shannon Sharpe, he's found himself in the position where, he's hit with a $50 million lawsuit. Now, if it was Shannon Jones, right? If Shannon Jones versus Shannon Sharpe, Tony Busby wouldn't be in the picture, right? Tony Busby is the one that filed this lawsuit. Tony Busby is not filing a lawsuit against Shannon Jones. Why? Well, you don't even know who Shannon Jones is, which means Shannon Jones is not sitting on millions of dollars, right? In order for a guy like Tony Busby to get into the picture, and I don't say this disparagingly, there's got to be big pockets to go after, right? And so if that's not the case, then that's where typically a person who's the victim of a rape or a sexual assault, an alleged rape or sexual assault, they're going to have gone to the police. They're going to have called the police. You know, if they decide to report it, they're going to call the police and go through that whole process that I mentioned earlier. But when you have somebody who has resources, then that's where you can file a civil lawsuit against them. And whether that's, you know, right or wrong, I think is not for me to judge. I mean, at the end of the day, again, if these things actually did happen, then she deserves all the money that she needs in order to compensate her for the mental anguish, the emotional anguish, the stress, everything that she's gone through as a result of having been taken advantage of in this way. If this did not happen, then she's basically played the system and gamed Shannon Sharpe. But ultimately, his decision to settle still makes sense because, you know, you don't want any more details about this coming out into the public eye. Why? Well, it sounds like there was a 9-figure media deal on the table ready for him to take, which then was either pulled from the table or just didn't happen immediately because, you know, a company cannot, they just, the optics of deciding to give somebody a deal in that situation doesn't make sense. In addition, you know, part of that money is going to come from, you know, advertising and sponsors, the likes of whom are not going to want to attach their name to somebody who's being currently or actively accused of sexual assault and rape. So they can't do that. That would be horrible for business. So that's why they have to pump the brakes on any negotiations, which means that he needs to make this thing go away as soon as reasonably possible. And then whatever deal gets negotiated first, it's not going to be what it was that you had on the table before this happened because you're hot right now, right? Like you're hot in a bad way. Like you're hot in a good way in terms of your viewership and how much people like you and everything, but you're also hot right now because of these allegations. We need to let this die down. And then once we've had this die down, a couple other big major stories come out and people forget about this, then we can come back to the table and do the deal, you know, that we were going to do before. I don't think that he's going to have lost a lot of fans in this process. I think a lot of people feel like, you know, he just got played, he got hustled by this OnlyFans model, right? And she's since retired, right? She was getting money on OnlyFans and posted that she doesn't need to do this anymore, so she's retiring. And so if she finessed Shannon Sharpe, then again, she's created generational wealth for her. And for Shannon Sharpe, it ends up being nothing more than a business decision, right? So if you have 9 figures coming your way, then to settle, and we don't have that specific amount, but it's said that they went to the table with $10 million, right? So there's going to have been pre-filing discussions, right? So before a lawsuit gets filed, Tony Busby is going to have reached out to Shannon Sharpe by way of a letter. Hey, my name is Tony Busby. I represent this woman who says X, Y, and Z happened. We need to make this right. So let's, schedule a settlement discussion, or they could have just demanded a certain amount of money at that point, saying that if you don't respond by a certain date, then we'll have no choice but to file a lawsuit. And then, at that point, it sounds like there was a settlement discussion, at which point Shannon Sharpe's lawyers, who they're going to have talked to him, right? They're going to have gotten the ins and outs and details, good, bad, and ugly about the situation, and say, hey, let's make an offer. They offered $10 million. That got rejected. Lawsuit gets filed. And, some months later, now we reach a settlement. So, at the end of the day, he's going to have reached that settlement based on advice of his lawyers, who are going to have, weighed the pros and cons and say, hey, listen, you do not want to take this to trial. You do not want to drag this litigation out any more than necessary. You have this big deal on the table that's going to come eventually. You need to pay this so that you still have that deal on the table. Because if more stuff comes out than is already out at this point, then you really run the risk of blowing that up. And, man, he engaged, in some colorful language with this young woman. He was talking about, the whole choking, and she's like, I don't want to be choked. And yes, you do. And that's another thing. He was clearly set up on that call. I've heard, and this wasn't a call set up by law enforcement. At least I don't think it was. So when you have sexual assault and rape cases that actually do get investigated by law enforcement, what they'll do is set up what they call a controlled call, where they try and have the alleged victim call the accused and have him admit to doing, what they're alleged to have done. So, so the alleged victim will say, well, what you did to me, it really bothered me, or I'm really upset about it. And it's a conversation to bait them into making the admission that they did it. So they have kind of a confession, or they have an apology for doing what they did. And I've almost never seen one of these or heard one of these calls where it doesn't sound really awkward or scripted or like a setup, really. And so I would just say to the fellas, obviously don't commit sexual assault, don't have sex without consent. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where, because I've definitely represented a whole slew of men who have been accused of rape and sexual assault, and they were completely innocent. They didn't do anything wrong. So this goes for everybody. If you find yourself in a situation where you're getting a call and that call seems just scripted, or the person doesn't sound like themselves, because, most people aren't good actors like that. Or it just feels, accusatory or just weird, or the vibes are off, just in the call, save yourself, because I've seen situations where people, were innocent, but ended up on one of these calls that almost sounded incriminating when they didn't do anything wrong. So you really have to protect yourself in that sense. But yeah, those calls, it was clear that she was trying to bait Shannon into saying certain things, and he did. And none of that stuff looks good. It's bad for business, and he put himself in a difficult spot. But again, there's probably things that he could have avoided to avoid being in the position that he was in the first place. That, I wouldn't know, because I would need to know more about the relationship and the situation. But in terms of where he landed, once, the lawyers get into the situation, and lawsuits are getting filed, and we're talking about 8-figure settlements and proposals and things like that, then, he did what would be the best thing for him given the circumstances. And hopefully he's able to lick his wounds, move on, make some better decisions, and keep the content coming. Because listen, man, I'm a fan of Shannon Sharpe. I love what he does. I'm even more impressed by the, just the transformation, right? To be able to go from killing it on the field to then taking that into media, doing an amazing job at it. And I just hope he stays on the positive path, and maybe can flip this into, something that is useful and beneficial. Maybe get out and start talking to some of these younger NFL cats. I know that they have those coaching or seminars, right? The player seminars where they have ex-players come out and tell them about the trials and tribulations and pitfalls and things like that. He could flip that into something positive. If you got something out of this video, show me some love, hit the like button, make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.